The evening rush hour at Grand Central Station was in full swing when Marcus Langford checked his gold watch for the third time. His private train car was running late, and he hated waiting among the common folk. At 52, Marcus had built an empire that spanned half the globe. His steel gray hair and tailored suits commanded respect in every boardroom from New York to Tokyo. But something wasn't right tonight. The familiar pressure in his chest had been building all day, and the medicine his doctor prescribed didn't seem to be helping. Marcus loosened his tie, trying to catch his breath in the stuffy underground air. On the other side of the platform, 8-year-old Tommy Wilson huddled in his usual corner, watching people hurry past. Nobody ever noticed him there, which was exactly how he liked it. His worn-out sneakers had holes in them, and his jacket was 3 sizes too big. Someone had thrown it away last winter, and it was the warmest thing he owned. Tommy knew all the regulars at the station. The hot dog vendor who sometimes gave him leftovers, the kind lady who cleaned the floors at night, and the man in the fancy suit who always stood in the same spot, waiting for his special train. Tommy had watched him many times, wondering what it would be like to have a father like that. Marcus felt the pain getting worse. His vision started to blur, and the station lights seemed to spin around him. He tried to reach for the wall, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. The last thing he heard was the rumble of an approaching train before everything went dark. Tommy saw it happen in slow motion. The man in the suit started swaying, then fell forward onto the tracks. The warning lights were already flashing. A train was coming. Without thinking, Tommy sprinted across the platform. "Someone help!" he shouted. But everyone was too busy with their phones or too far away. The train's headlights were getting brighter. Tommy knew he only had seconds. He jumped down onto the tracks. The man was heavy, but Tommy had learned to be strong. Life on the streets taught you that. He grabbed the man's coat and pulled with everything he had. "Please, mister, you gotta help me," Tommy begged. The man groaned but didn't move. The train's horn blasted through the station. Tommy could feel the vibrations in the rails under his feet. With one final surge of desperate strength, Tommy managed to roll the man off the tracks. They tumbled onto the platform together just as the train roared past, sending Tommy's ragged jacket fluttering in the wind. A crowd gathered around them. Someone was calling for help. Marcus opened his eyes slowly, his head spinning. He found himself looking into the concerned face of a young boy with dirt-smudged cheeks and the most determined expression he'd ever seen. "You okay, mister?" Tommy asked, his voice shaking a little. Marcus tried to sit up, but the pain in his chest made him wince. You saved my life." "Yeah, I guess I did." Tommy managed a small smile, then started to back away as he always did when too many people were around. "Wait," Marcus called out. "Please, what's your name? Let me help you." Tommy hesitated. He'd learned not to trust offers of help. They usually came with strings attached, but something in the man's eyes made him stop. "Tommy," he said quietly. "Tommy Wilson. I'm Marcus Langford, and I owe you everything. Whatever you want, money, clothes, a place to stay." Tommy looked down at his worn-out shoes. "I don't need money," he mumbled. "Or toys or nothing like that," Marcus frowned. "Then what do you want?" The words came out before Tommy could stop them. Could you just be my dad? Just for one day?" The request hit Marcus like a physical blow. In all his years of business deals and negotiations, no one had ever asked for something so simple, yet so profound. He thought about his own father, who had died when Marcus was young, leaving him to build his empire alone. He thought about how empty his massive penthouse felt, how meaningless his wealth sometimes seemed. The paramedics were arriving now, pushing through the crowd with their equipment, but Marcus couldn't take his eyes off the brave little boy who had saved his life and then asked for nothing but love in return. "One day?" Marcus said softly. "No, Tommy. One day wouldn't be enough." Tommy's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" "But..." Before Marcus could answer, the paramedics were lifting him onto a stretcher. His chest pain was getting worse again. "Don't leave," he managed to say to Tommy. "Please, stay with me." Tommy watched as they loaded Marcus into the ambulance. A police officer tried to guide him away, but Marcus called out weakly, "He comes with me. He's his family." As the ambulance doors closed and the sirens started wailing, Tommy found himself sitting next to the stretcher, holding the hand of the richest man in New York. Neither of them knew it yet, but their lives had changed forever, in ways that went far beyond that rescue on the train tracks. And somewhere in the gathering darkness outside, a city that had been cruel to both of them in different ways was about to witness a story of second chances that would touch hearts and change lives far beyond the walls of Grand Central Station. The emergency room at Mount Sinai Hospital was buzzing with activity when Marcus Langford arrived. Doctors rushed around his stretcher while Tommy tried to keep up, still holding onto Marcus's hand. A nurse stopped Tommy at the entrance to the trauma room. "You'll have to wait outside, sweetie," she said kindly. Tommy's face fell. He was used to being told to wait outside places, but Marcus wouldn't let go of his hand. "He stays," Marcus insisted, his voice weak but firm. "Please." The nurse looked uncertain, but something in Marcus's eyes made her nod. "All right, but stay out of the way, young man." Tommy pressed himself against the wall, watching as doctors hooked Marcus up to machines and stuck needles in his arm. He'd never been in a hospital before, at least not since he could remember. The beeping machine scared him a little, but he refused to show it. "Mr. Langford," a doctor said, looking at some test results, "you're having a heart attack. We need to operate immediately." Marcus nodded slowly, then turned to Tommy. "Don't go anywhere. Promise me." "I promise," Tommy whispered. As they wheeled Marcus away to surgery, a social worker appeared beside Tommy. Her name tag said, "Ms. Roberts." "Hi there," she said gently. "We should call your parents." "I don't have any," Tommy cut her off. "And I'm not leaving, I promised him." Ms. Roberts frowned. "You can't stay here alone, hospital policy." "Let him stay." A deep voice interrupted them. A tall man in an expensive suit was striding down the hallway. "I'm Richard Stone, Mr. Langford's attorney. The boy saved my client's life tonight. Whatever he needs, he gets." Tommy had never had anyone stand up for him before. He watched in amazement as Richard pulled out his phone and made some calls. Within an hour, a security guard brought Tommy a sandwich and some clean clothes from the hospital gift shop. "Mr. Langford's surgery will take several hours," Richard explained. "Why don't you tell me about yourself, Tommy?" Tommy picked at his sandwich. "Not much to tell. Been on my own since my mom died 2 years ago. Foster homes didn't work out." Richard's expression softened. "And your father?" "Never knew him. Mom said he left before I was born." The surgery lasted 5 hours. Tommy dozed off in a waiting room chair, but woke up every time someone walked past. Finally, the doctor came out, looking tired, but relieved. "Mr. Langford made it through the surgery," he announced. "He's stable now." Tommy felt tears in his eyes, but quickly wiped them away. Street kids didn't cry. They let him visit Marcus in the recovery room. The powerful businessman looked different now, connected to all those machines. But when he opened his eyes and saw Tommy, his whole face lit up. "You stayed," Marcus whispered. "Of course I did. I promised, didn't I?" A nurse came in to check Marcus's vital signs. "You should be resting, Mr. Langford." "I will," Marcus said. "But first I need to make some arrangements." "Richard?" The lawyer stepped forward with his phone ready. "I want temporary guardianship papers drawn up for Tommy," Marcus said. "And get someone to prepare the guest room at my penthouse." Tommy's heart stopped. "What?" Marcus reached for his hand again. "You asked for 1 day as my son, but I'm thinking, maybe we could try for longer than that if you want to." But you don't even know me," Tommy stammered. "I know you're brave. I know you're strong. And I know you have a bigger heart than anyone I've ever met." Marcus squeezed his hand. "The rest we can figure out together." Before Tommy could answer, there was a commotion in the hallway. A woman's voice rang out. "Where is he? Where's my Marcus?" A tall, glamorous woman in designer clothes burst into the room. Her red hair was perfectly styled, and her jewelry probably cost more than most people made in a year. "Oh, darling," she cried, rushing to Marcus's bedside. "I came as soon as I heard. Your poor heart." "Hello, Victoria," Marcus said tiredly. Tommy backed away from the bed, suddenly feeling very small and out of place. Victoria seemed to notice him for the first time. "Who is this child?" she asked, wrinkling her nose. "This is Tommy," Marcus said firmly. "He saved my life tonight, and he's going to be staying with me." Victoria's perfectly made-up face froze. Staying with you? Marcus, darling, you can't be serious. You need rest and care, not some street urchin running around your home. That's enough, Victoria. Marcus's voice was quiet but firm. Tommy stays. End of discussion. Tommy had never heard anyone stand up for him like that before. He felt something warm growing in his chest, something he hadn't felt since his mum died. Victoria stormed out of the room, her high heels clicking angrily on the hospital floor. Richard followed her, already making more phone calls. I'm sorry. It's about that, Marcus said to Tommy. Victoria and well, it's complicated. She's been trying to get me to marry her for years. She doesn't like me, Tommy said simply. Victoria doesn't like anything that might come between her and my money, Marcus replied. But don't worry about her. What matters is what you think. Do you want to give this a try? Living with me? Tommy looked around the hospital room, at all the fancy machines and the worried faces of the doctors and nurses. He looked at Marcus, who was offering him something he'd stopped believing in, a home, a family. What if... Tommy's voice shook a little. What if it doesn't work out? Marcus smiled. Then we'll figure something else out, but Tommy, something tells me this is meant to be. You saved more than my life tonight. You woke me up, made me realize what's really important. A doctor came in to check Marcus's monitors again. You really need to rest now, Mr. Langford. Just one more minute, Marcus said. He turned back to Tommy. So what do you say, son? Want to come home? That word, son, hit Tommy like a wave of warm sunshine. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Good, Marcus said softly, because I meant what I said before. One day would never be enough. Aziz. Marcus drifted off to sleep. Tommy settled into the chair beside his bed. For the first time in 2 years, he didn't have to worry about where he would sleep or what he would eat. For the first time since losing his mom, he felt safe. Outside, the hospital window, the lights of New York City twinkled like stars. Somewhere out there was Marcus's penthouse, his new home. But for now, Tommy was content to stay right where he was, watching over the man who had offered him more than just a place to live. He had offered him a chance to be a son again. Marcus stayed in the hospital for a week. Tommy never left his side, sleeping in the chair next to the bed, despite the nurse's attempts to make him use the fold-out cot they brought in. He was afraid that if he slept too deeply, everything would turn out to be a dream. Richard, the lawyer, came by every day with papers to sign and problems to solve. He'd arranged temporary guardianship for Tommy, but there were still lots of questions to answer. The press is going crazy with this story, Richard told Marcus one morning while Tommy was in the bathroom. Billionaire saved by homeless boy. It's all over the news. We need to control the narrative. Marcus shook his head. No press conferences, no interviews. Tommy's been through enough. I won't turn him into a circus attraction. But keeping the press away wasn't their only problem. Victoria showed up every day, always when there were photographers around. She'd sweep into the room wearing designer outfits, carrying expensive gifts for Marcus. And how's our little hero today? She'd ask Tommy in a sugary voice that didn't match her eyes. Tommy would just shrug and move closer to Marcus's bed. He didn't trust Victoria. Something about the way she looked at Marcus reminded him of the way some people on the street looked at tourists, like they were just walking wallets. Finally, the day came for Marcus to go home. Tommy stood nervously in the hospital room, wearing new clothes that Richard had bought him. Everything felt strange. The soft cotton shirt, the shoes that didn't have holes, the warm jacket that actually fit. Ready to see your new home? Marcus asked, sitting in the wheelchair the hospital insisted he use. Tommy nodded, clutching the small backpack that held his only possessions from his old life, a worn photo of his mom, and the blue marble she'd given him for his 6th birthday. The ride to Marcus's penthouse was like entering another world. The private elevator opened directly into a massive living room with windows that seemed to touch the sky. Tommy had never seen anything like it. Welcome home, Marcus said, watching Tommy's face. But before Tommy could respond, a sharp voice cut through the moment. Marcus, darling, I've been waiting for hours. Victoria rose from one of the leather couches, her red hair gleaming in the sunlight from the windows. Behind her stood a severe-looking woman in a grey suit. What are you doing here, Victoria? Marcus asked tiredly. I'm supposed to be resting. That's exactly why I'm here. Victoria gestured to the woman beside her. "This is Mrs. Blackwood from the Premier Academy. I've arranged everything. She's going to interview Tommy right away." Tommy felt his stomach twist. He knew about interviews. They happened at foster homes and they never ended well. Interview? Marcus frowned. For what? School, of course. Victoria smiled brightly. Premier Academy is the most exclusive private school in Manhattan. All the right families send their children there. We have to get him properly educated if he's going to be associated with you. Mrs. Blackwood stepped forward, looking Tommy up and down like he was a piece of furniture she wasn't sure about buying. "Shall we begin the assessment?" "No." Marcus's voice was firm. "Tommy just got here. He needs time to settle in." "But darling," Victoria protested, "the waiting list is years long. I had to call in so many favors." "I said no." Marcus stood up from his wheelchair. "Tommy will go to school when he's ready and we'll choose one together." Mrs. Blackwood's lips tightened. "Mr. Langford, perhaps you don't understand. Premier Academy has certain standards. And perhaps you don't understand." Marcus cut her off. "This is Tommy's home now. He doesn't need to prove himself to anyone." After the women left, Tommy sat on the edge of the huge couch, feeling lost in the massive room. "Maybe they're right," he said quietly. "Maybe I don't belong here." Marcus sat next to him. "Want to know a secret? When I first made my money, people like Victoria and Mrs. Blackwood tried to tell me I didn't belong in their world either. But this is your home now, Tommy. You belong wherever you want to belong." Tommy looked up at him. "Really? Really?" Marcus smiled. "Now, how about we explore this place together? I had them set up your room, but we can change anything you don't like." Tommy's room turned out to be bigger than any apartment he remembered living in with his mom. There was a huge bed, a desk with a computer, and a wall of empty shelves waiting to be filled. "It's too much," Tommy whispered. "It's just right," Marcus corrected him. "Though we might need to get you some books for those shelves. Do you like to read?" Tommy nodded slowly. "Mom used to read to me, before she got sick." Marcus put a gentle hand on Tommy's shoulder. "Tell me about her." And for the first time since coming to live with Marcus, Tommy felt tears rolling down his cheeks. He told Marcus about his mom, how she always smiled even when things were hard, how she worked 2 jobs to keep them fed, how she got sick and couldn't work anymore. "She made me promise to be brave," Tommy said, wiping his eyes. "But sometimes I get scared." "Being brave doesn't mean you're never scared," Marcus said softly. "It means doing what's right even when you are scared, like jumping onto those train tracks to save someone." Tommy looked around the huge room again, but this time he saw something different. He saw a place where he might belong, with someone who understood what it meant to be scared and brave at the same time. "Can I put my mum's picture on the desk?" he asked. "Of course." Marcus squeezed his shoulder. "This is your space, Tommy. You can make it yours in whatever way feels right." That night, after Marcus had gone to bed in his room down the hall, Tommy lay awake in his new bed. Everything was so quiet up here above the city. No sirens, no shouting, no sounds of trains rumbling past. He got up and went to the window, looking out at the glittering city below. Somewhere down there were the train tracks where everything had changed. Somewhere down there was his old life. But up here, in this tower in the sky, a new life was beginning. It scared him a little, but like Marcus said, being brave meant doing things even when you were scared. Tommy touched the blue marble in his pocket, his mum's last gift to him. "I'm trying to be brave, Mum," he whispered to the night sky. I think maybe things are going to be okay." Down the hall, Marcus lay awake too, thinking about the boy who had saved more than just his life. Tomorrow there would be more challenges. School decisions to make, press to deal with, Victoria's schemes to handle. But for now, in the quiet of their first night home, both the man and the boy who had found each other by chance were beginning to feel like maybe, just maybe, they had found something they didn't even know they were looking for. A family. The fee. Next few weeks brought big changes to both Tommy and Marcus's lives. Marcus worked from home while recovering, setting up an office in the penthouse living room so he could keep an eye on Tommy. For the first time in his life, business deals and stock prices weren't his only focus. Tommy was starting to feel more comfortable in his new home, but some habits were hard to break. Marcus would still find him sleeping on the floor sometimes, or hiding food in his pockets at dinner. Each time, he'd gently remind Tommy that he was safe now, that there would always be enough. Old habits, Tommy would say with a shrug, but his eyes held shadows of harder times. One morning, while they were having breakfast, Victoria burst in without warning. She was wearing a fancy pink suit and carrying a stack of magazines. "Marcus, we have to talk about the charity gala," she announced, dropping the magazines on the table. "It's in 2 weeks and everyone's expecting you to make your first public appearance since the accident." Marcus sighed. "I told you I'm not ready for public events yet. The doctor said you need to start resuming normal activities." Victoria cut in. She glanced at Tommy, who was quietly eating his cereal. "And we need to show everyone that you're still the same Marcus Langford, not some changed man." Tommy understood what she meant. Victoria didn't want people to know that Marcus was spending more time being a father than running his company. She was afraid it would make him look weak. "The gala is for the Children's Hospital," Victoria pressed on. "You've always been the biggest donor. If you don't show up, people will talk." Marcus looked at Tommy, then back at Victoria. "Fine, but Tommy comes with me." Victoria's perfect smile froze. "Darling, be reasonable. It's a black tie event. There will be press, important people." "Then we'll get him a suit," Marcus said firmly. "He's my family now, Victoria. Where I go, he goes." After Victoria left in a huff, Tommy helped Marcus clear the breakfast dishes. "I don't have to go," he said quietly. "I won't know how to act at a fancy party." Marcus turned to him with a gentle smile. "Neither did I the first time, but we'll learn together. Besides, I have a feeling you might enjoy meeting some of the kids from the hospital. They're the real guests of honor." That afternoon, Richard came by with more papers to sign. Tommy was doing his schoolwork. Marcus had hired a tutor to help him catch up before starting at a new school, but he could hear them talking in the office. "The board is getting restless," Richard was saying. "They expected you back at work by now, and these rumors about Victoria." "What rumors?" Marcus asked. "She's been telling people that your situation with Tommy is just temporary, that once you're fully recovered, things will go back to normal." Tommy's pencil stopped moving. His heart felt like it was being squeezed in his chest. Was it true? Would Marcus send him away? Once he was better. He must have made a noise because Marcus appeared in the doorway. "Tommy, how long have you been listening?" Tommy couldn't meet his eyes. Are you going to send me back?" "What? No." Marcus crossed the room and knelt beside Tommy's chair. "Never. You're my son now, Tommy. Nothing and no one is going to change that." "But Victoria says a lot of things," Marcus interrupted. "None of them matter. What matters is what's in here." He tapped Tommy's chest right over his heart. "And in here," he tapped his own. "We're family now. Forever." Tommy felt tears welling up, but didn't try to hide them this time. "Promise. Promise." Marcus hugged him tight. "In fact," he turned to Richard, who was watching from the doorway. "Draw up the permanent adoption papers. It's time to make this official." Richard nodded, but his face was serious. "You know Victoria won't like it. She's had her heart set on being Mrs. Langford for years. An adopted son could complicate her plans for your estate." "Good," Marcus said firmly, "because Tommy isn't going anywhere, and it's time everyone knew it." That evening, Marcus took Tommy shopping for his gala suit. The store was the fanciest place Tommy had ever been, with thick carpets and mirrors everywhere. The salespeople fussed over them, bringing out suit after suit for Tommy to try. "How about this one?" Marcus held up a deep blue suit that reminded Tommy of the night sky. Tommy touched the soft fabric carefully. "It's nice, but what?" "Can I get a red tie?" Tommy asked shyly. "Mom always said red was a brave color." Marcus smiled. "Red. Tie it is." As they were leaving the store, they passed a jewelry display. Tommy stopped, staring at something in the case. "What is it?" Marcus asked. Tommy pointed to a simple silver pendant in the shape of a train. "It's like the one that was coming when we met." Without hesitation, Marcus called the salesperson back. "We'll take that too." Later that night, Tommy sat on his bed, holding the pendant. He could hear Marcus on the phone in his office. dealing with more business calls, but now he knew he didn't have to worry about being sent away. Marcus had chosen him, just like he'd chosen Marcus that night on the train platform. He got up and went to his desk, picking up his mom's picture. "I wish you could meet him, Mom," he whispered. "I think you'd like him. He takes care of me just like you did." A soft knock at his door made him look up. Marcus stood there looking tired but happy. "Everything okay?" Tommy asked. "Better than okay," Marcus said. "I just got off the phone with the adoption lawyer. If you're ready, we can make it official next week." Tommy's heart felt like it might burst. "Really? Really?" Marcus sat on the bed beside him. "I know it won't always be easy. Victoria's going to make trouble and there will be people who don't understand. But we're in this together now." Tommy touched the train pendant around his neck. "Like that night at the station?" "Exactly. Like that night," Marcus smiled. "You saved my life then, Tommy. But you know what? You're still saving it every day just by being here." They sat together for a while, watching the city lights twinkle through the window. Tommy thought about how much his life had changed in just a few weeks. He had a home now, a father, a future. But most importantly, he had someone who chose him, who wanted him, who promised to keep him safe. Down in the city below, trains were still running through Grand Central Station. But up here in their tower in the sky, a man who had everything but love and a boy who had nothing but heart had found what they were both looking for: each other. The morning of the charity gala arrived with dark clouds threatening rain. Tommy stood in front of his bedroom mirror, trying to get his tie straight. His new suit felt stiff, but Marcus had promised it would get more comfortable as the night went on. "Need some help?" Marcus appeared in the doorway, already dressed, in his tuxedo. Tommy nodded, giving up on the tie. As Marcus fixed it for him, Tommy noticed how much steadier his hands were now. The doctors said he was recovering well from his heart attack. "Nervous about tonight?" Marcus asked. "A little," Tommy admitted. "What if I mess up? What if I embarrass you?" Marcus finished with the shak's eye and put his hands on Tommy's shoulders. "You could never embarrass me. Just be yourself, that's more than enough." But Tommy wasn't the only one worried about the gala. Richard arrived early, looking stressed. "We have a problem," he told Marcus, while Tommy was in his room getting ready. "Victoria's been talking to the press. She's turned this into a media circus. Every reporter in the city will be there tonight." Marcus frowned. "I thought this was a private event." "It was supposed to be. But Victoria's been spreading hints about a big announcement tonight. The press thinks you're going to propose to her." Tommy, who had come out to get a glass of water, froze in the hallway. His heart started racing. If Marcus married Victoria, where would that leave him? "That woman has gone too far," Marcus said, his voice angry but controlled. "Call the adoption lawyer. I want those papers ready first thing Monday morning." Tommy felt himself breathe again. But their problems weren't over. When they arrived at the gala, the front of the hotel was packed with photographers and reporters. Camera flashes went off like lightning as their car pulled up. "Ready?" Marcus asked, squeezing Tommy's hand. Tommy nodded, holding tight to his train pendant with his other hand. Together they stepped out into the chaos. "Mr. Langford, is it true you're announcing your engagement tonight?" "Mr. Langford, what about the rumors that the boy is just a publicity stunt?" "Tommy, how does it feel to go from homeless to living in a penthouse?" Marcus kept his arm around Tommy's shoulders, guiding him through the crowd without answering any questions. Inside the hotel ballroom, things weren't much better. Everyone stared at them, whispering behind their hands. Victoria swept over immediately, wearing a sparkly red dress that matched her hair. "Marcus, darling, and Tommy." She said his name like it was something unpleasant. "Come, Marcus. Everyone's waiting to talk to you." She tried to pull Marcus away, but he didn't move. "Tommy and I will make the rounds together, thank you." Victoria's smile tightened. "But the hospital board wants to discuss the new children's wing. Surely the boy doesn't need to be part of that conversation?" "The boy," Marcus said firmly, "is my son, and yes, he does." They moved through the crowd together, meeting doctors, nurses, and some of the kids from the hospital. Tommy started to relax a little when he met other children his age. Some of them were sick, but they were all excited about the party. "Did you really save Mr. Langford's life?" one girl in a wheelchair asked Tommy. Before Tommy could answer, a sharp voice cut through the conversation. Oh, what a charming story that was. It was Mrs. Blackwood from Premier Academy, standing with a group of wealthy-looking people. But surely, Mr. Langford, you can't be serious about adopting him. Think of your reputation. The room got very quiet. Tommy felt all eyes on him, judging, wondering. But then Marcus did something that surprised everyone. He took Tommy's hand and led him to the stage where the band was playing. Taking the microphone, he addressed the whole room. You are wondering why I'm here tonight, he began. You've heard rumors about announcements and engagements. Well, I do have an announcement to make. Victoria rushed forward, her face glowing with expectation, but Marcus wasn't looking at her. 8 weeks ago, I almost died on a train platform. A little boy with nothing to his name risked his life to save mine. He asked for nothing in return except to know what it felt like to have a father, even for just one day. Marcus's voice grew thick with emotion. That day has turned into weeks, and those weeks have shown me what truly matters in life. He turned to Tommy, who was standing nervously beside him. Tommy Wilson saved more than my life that night. He saved my heart in every way possible, and on Monday morning, I'll be filing papers to make him officially what he already is, in every way that matters. My son. The room erupted in gasps and whispers. Victoria's face turned as red as her dress, but Tommy barely noticed any of it because Marcus was hugging him tight, right there in front of everyone. I love you, son, Marcus whispered, just for Tommy to hear. Tommy hugged him back, not caring about the tears running down his face. I love you too, Dad. It was the first time he'd said that word since coming to live with Marcus. It felt right, like it had been waiting all this time to be said. But their moment was interrupted by a commotion at the back of the room. A man was pushing his way through the crowd, followed by police officers. Stop right there, the man shouted. That's my son. Tommy's whole body went cold. He knew that voice, even though he hadn't heard it in 8 years. His father had found him, the man who had abandoned Tommy and his mother before he was even born, was standing in the middle of the charity gala, demanding his son back. And suddenly the happiness Tommy had found seemed as fragile as a soap bubble in a storm. The charity gala erupted into chaos. Reporters who had been lurking outside burst into the ballroom, cameras flashing. Tommy stood frozen on the stage, clinging to Marcus's hand as his whole world threatened to fall apart. The man claiming to be his father pushed through the crowd. He wore a cheap suit that didn't fit right, and his face was red from shouting. That's my boy, I've been looking everywhere for him. Marcus stepped in front of Tommy protectively. Richard, he called to his lawyer, get security in here now. Victoria watched everything with a gleaming smile, like Christmas had come early. She sidled up to Mrs. Blackwood and whispered loudly enough for others to hear, I told you there would be complications with that boy. 2 police officers approached the stage. Mr. Langford, one said, we need to sort this out. This man claims to be James Wilson, the boy's biological father. Tommy felt like he couldn't breathe. The room was spinning. He'd never even seen a picture of his father. His mom had thrown them all away after he left. But looking at the man now, Tommy could see his own nose and chin reflected back at him. I never gave up my parental rights, James Wilson announced. I have a claim to my son. Marcus's face had gone pale, but his voice was steady. Tommy, go with Richard to my office upstairs. I'll handle this. But Tommy couldn't move. Don't send me away, he whispered. Please. Never, Marcus promised. We're just going somewhere quiet to figure this out. I'll be there soon. Richard led Tommy through a side door and up to a private office in the hotel. Through the windows, they could see reporters gathering outside the building like vultures. How did he find me? Tommy asked, his voice shaking. Richard sighed. The news coverage of your rescue was everywhere. He must have seen it. They waited for what felt like hours. Tommy sat in a big leather chair, still wearing his new suit, still holding his train pendant. Everything had been so perfect just an hour ago. Finally, the door opened. Marcus came in, followed by 2 police officers and James Wilson. Tommy instinctively moved closer to Marcus. The situation is complicated, one officer explained. Mr. Wilson never legally terminated his parental rights. He has a claim. A claim? Marcus's voice was cold. He abandoned his son before he was born. Where was his claim when Tommy and his mother were struggling? Where was his claim when Tommy was living on the streets? James Wilson shifted uncomfortably. I've changed. I want to make things right. After 8 years, Marcus challenged. Or after you saw Tommy's story on the news? After you realized he was living with a billionaire? Wilson's face turned red again. He's my blood. You can't just buy my son. Stop it. Everyone turned to look at Tommy. He was standing now, tears running down his face, but his voice strong. You're not my father, he said to Wilson. A father doesn't leave. A father doesn't wait until his son is on TV to come looking. A father loves you and protects you and fixes your tie when you're nervous about a party. Marcus put his hand on Tommy's shoulder, and Tommy drew strength from his touch. Where were you when Mum got sick? Tommy demanded. Where were you when she died? Where were you when I was sleeping in train stations and eating from garbage cans? Wilson took a step back, startled by the fury in the small boy's voice. I've got a father now, Tommy continued. A real one. And you can't take that away. I won't let you. One of the officers cleared his throat. Mr. Wilson, did you know your son was homeless after his mother's death? I didn't know she had died, Wilson mumbled. And yet you made no effort to find them in 8 years. The officer pulled out a notebook. No child support payments, no contact attempts. Wilson's confidence began to crumble. I had problems, debts, gambling. Debts? Marcus cut in. My investigators found them, along with 3 other children you've abandoned in different states. The officers exchanged looks. Mr. Wilson, we're going to need you to come down to the station. There are some warrants. We need to discuss. As they led Wilson away, he turned back. Tommy, please, I'm your real father. But Tommy just held tighter to Marcus's hand. No, he said quietly. You're just the man who left. After they were gone, Tommy collapsed into Marcus's arms, finally letting out all the tears and fear he'd been holding back. I was so scared, he sobbed. I thought they'd make me go with him. Marcus held him close. Never. I promise you, Tommy. We're going to fight this together. Richard is already filing emergency papers to block any custody claim. Wilson will have to prove he's a fit parent, and from what we found about his past, that's not going to happen. Tommy looked up at him. Can we go home? Of course. Marcus wiped Tommy's tears with his thumb. Though I imagine there are still reporters everywhere. Think you can be brave for a little longer? Tommy touched his train pendant. Mom always said brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you keep going anyway. Marcus smiled. Your mum was a very wise woman. I wish I could have met her. She would have liked you, Tommy said, because you take care of me the way she did. They made their way down to the hotel lobby where Richard was waiting with security guards to escort them to their car. As predicted, reporters swarmed around them, shouting questions. Mr. Langford, will you fight for custody? Tommy, do you want to live with your real father? Is this custody battle going to affect the adoption? But Tommy and Marcus walked through it all together, neither one letting go of the other's hand. When they got to their car, Tommy saw Victoria standing by the hotel entrance, looking furious that her plan to ruin the evening hadn't worked out quite the way she'd hoped. The car ride home was quiet. Tommy leaned against Marcus, emotionally exhausted. Dad, he said softly. Marcus's heart swelled at the word. Yes, son? We're still going to be okay, right? Marcus hugged him closer. More than okay. You know why? Because real family isn't about blood or DNA or who was there first. It's about love and choice and who's there when it matters. And I choose you, Tommy. I'll always choose you. As their car drove through the rainy city streets, Tommy finally felt his fear begin to fade. His biological father might have shown up to cause trouble, but he hadn't succeeded in breaking what Tommy and Marcus had built together. Some bonds, Tommy realized, were stronger than blood. They were built on love, trust, and the kind of courage it takes to save someone's life on a train platform. And those were the bonds that would last forever. The morning after the gala, Marcus and Tommy sat at their breakfast table, both trying to act normal even though nothing felt normal anymore. The newspapers spread out before them all carried the same headlines. Custody battle looms for billionaire's adopted son, and long-lost father claims rights to rescue boy. Tommy pushed his cereal around in his bowl, barely eating. Everyone at school's going to know about this, aren't they? Marcus put down his coffee cup. They had planned for Tommy to start at his new school next week. We can wait if you want. Give things time to settle down. But Tommy shook his head. Mom always said running away from problems just makes them bigger. Marcus smiled. Your mom was right again, but you don't have to face those problems alone, not anymore. The elevator dinged, and Richard walked in carrying his briefcase. He looked like he hadn't slept all night. How bad is it? Marcus asked while Tommy went to get dressed for his tutoring session. Richard spread more papers on the table. James Wilson has hired a lawyer, Gloria Chase. She specializes in custody battles and loves publicity. They're claiming Wilson has reformed and wants to make amends. Reformed? Marcus snorted. He was at a casino last night after leaving the police station. My investigators followed him. We'll use that, Richard assured him. But Victoria's stirring up trouble too. She's giving interviews, talking about how she always knew taking in Tommy would lead to complications. Marcus's face darkened. I want her banned from the building and call the board, schedule an emergency meeting for tomorrow. It's time they understood some things are more important than stock prices. Tommy came back just as Marcus's phone rang. It was the hospital board, demanding to know how the charity gala had turned into a media circus. Marcus took the call in his office, leaving Tommy with Richard. Are they going to make me talk to him? Tommy asked quietly. James Wilson, I mean. Richard put a gentle hand on his shoulder. Not if you don't want to. You have rights too, Tommy, and Marcus and I will protect them. The elevator dinged again. This time it was Sarah, Tommy's tutor, arriving for their morning session. But she wasn't alone. I'm sorry, Mr. Langford, the doorman's voice came through the intercom. She insisted on coming up, said she had papers to serve. A tall woman in a sharp business suit strode in. Gloria Chase, representing James Wilson, she announced, holding out an envelope. These are papers requesting immediate visitation rights with his son. Tommy backed away until he hit the wall. No, I don't want to see him. Marcus burst out of his office. Get out of my home. You can't just barge in here. Actually, I can, Chase said smoothly. And if you try to prevent contact between my client and his son, it won't look good to the judge. Mr. Wilson simply wants to reconnect with his child. What kind of father would stand in the way of that? The kind who's protecting his son from more trauma, Marcus shot back. Tommy's made it clear he doesn't want contact. You're frightening him. Chase turned to Tommy with a practiced, sympathetic smile. Don't you want to know your real father, Tommy? Don't you have questions about where you came from? I know where I came from, Tommy said, his voice shaking but determined. I came from my mom, who loved me even when we had nothing. And now I have a real dad who loves me too. I don't need another one. Chase's smile slipped a little. The court might see things differently. Blood ties are very important. More important than love, Tommy challenged. More important than choice? Your client chose to leave. Marcus chose to stay. That's the only blood tie I care about. The kind you choose to keep. Everyone stared at Tommy, surprised by the wisdom in his words. Even Chase seemed taken aback. Well, she recovered quickly, we'll let the judge decide what's best for you. After she left, Tommy stayed pressed against the wall, trembling. Marcus went to him immediately, pulling him into a hug. I'm proud of you, he whispered, so proud of how brave you're being. Sarah, the tutor, who had witnessed everything, stepped forward. Maybe we should skip lessons today, but Tommy straightened up, wiping his eyes. No. Mom always said education was the most important thing. She worked so hard to keep me in school, even when things were bad. Marcus squeezed his shoulder. How about a compromise? Half lesson today, then we'll do something fun this afternoon, just you and me. Tommy managed a small smile. Can we go to the train museum? The train museum? Marcus was surprised. After everything that had happened at the station, he thought, Tommy might want to avoid trains. Yeah, Tommy touched his pendant. To remind us how we found each other, how sometimes bad moments can lead to good things. Marcus hugged him again, his heart full of love for this remarkable boy who had taught him so much about courage and wisdom. They spent the afternoon at the train museum, learning about old steam engines and modern bullet trains. Tommy was especially fascinated by the model train display, where tiny versions of Grand Central Station played out endless arrivals and departures. "Look," Tommy pointed to a miniature platform. "That's where it happened, where everything changed." Marcus watched his son's face, seeing not fear or trauma, but understanding and even gratitude. Tommy had taken something frightening and turned it into a story of hope. That evening, as they rode home in their car, Tommy asked, "What do you think Mum would say about all this? About James Wilson coming back?" Marcus thought carefully before answering. "From everything you've told me about her, I think she'd be proud of how strong you're being. And I think she'd be happy you found someone who loves you as much as she did." Tommy was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes I feel guilty," he admitted. "Guilty? Why?" Because I'm happy here with you. And I miss Mom, but sometimes I forget to feel sad because I'm so happy." "Is that wrong?" Marcus pulled Tommy close. "No, son, that's exactly what your mum would want. She loved you enough to want you to be happy even after she was gone. Being happy doesn't mean you love her any less." When they got home, there were more reporters outside their building, but Tommy walked through them with his head held high, holding Marcus's hand. "They can't hurt us, can they?" Tommy asked as they rode up in their elevator. "James Wilson and Victoria and all of them?" "They can try," Marcus said, "but they don't understand what they're up against. They think this is about money or publicity or legal rights, but it's about something much stronger than that." "What?" Marcus smiled. "Love. The kind that makes an 8-year-old boy jump onto train tracks to save a stranger. The kind that makes a man realize what really matters in life. The kind that builds families not from blood but from choice." The elevator doors opened to their penthouse, and Tommy looked around at the home they'd made together. No matter what headlines came tomorrow, no matter what legal battles they faced, this was where he belonged, with his real father, his chosen father, the one who had promised to love him forever and proved it every single day. The next few days brought more challenges than either Tommy or Marcus had expected. Every morning, news vans camped outside their building. Every afternoon, Gloria Chase found new ways to pressure them about James Wilson's visitation rights. And every evening, Victoria appeared on another TV show, telling the world how concerned she was about poor Marcus getting in over his head. But the biggest challenge came from an unexpected direction: Marcus's company board. "They're calling an emergency vote," Richard explained one morning, after Tommy had gone to his tutoring session. "Victoria's been talking to the shareholders. They're worried about the company's image, about the publicity from the custody battle." Marcus's face was grim. "They want me to step down as CEO?" Temporarily, Richard nodded. "Until this personal matter is resolved." "Personal matter?" Marcus's voice rose. "My son is not a personal matter." Tommy, who was supposed to be doing math with Sarah in the next room, heard everything. His pencil stopped moving as guilt flooded through him. Was Marcus going to lose everything because of him? That afternoon, while Marcus was on the phone with Richard, Tommy slipped into his study. On Marcus's desk was a framed photo from their day at the train museum, both of them smiling without a care in the world. Next to it were stacks of legal papers, custody documents, company reports, letters from shareholders. Tommy picked up the photo, his heart heavy. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe he was causing too many problems. "Tommy?" Marcus stood in the doorway. "What's wrong, son?" "Maybe." Tommy's voice cracked. "Maybe it would be better if I left." "What?" Marcus crossed the room in 3 strides. "What are you talking about? Your company, the board, everything's going wrong because of me." Tommy couldn't hold back his tears. "I don't want you to lose everything." Marcus knelt in front of him, taking the photo from his trembling hands. "Tommy, look at me. You're not something I'm going to lose. You're everything I've gained. But your company is just a company." Marcus's voice was firm. "I built it once. I can build it again if I have to. But you, Tommy, you're my son. Nothing is more important than that." Tommy wiped his eyes. "Really?" "Really," Marcus smiled. "In fact..." He went to his desk and pressed the intercom. "Susan, call the board. Tell them I'll be there in an hour. And Tommy's coming with me." An hour later, they stood outside the grand boardroom of Langford Enterprises. Tommy wore his blue suit from the gala. It didn't feel so stiff anymore. "Ready?" Marcus asked. Tommy nodded, straightening his red tie just like Marcus had taught him. They walked into the boardroom together. 20 stern faces looked up from the long table. Victoria sat at one end, a triumphant smile on her face. "Marcus," she purred, "this is a closed board meeting. Surely you don't intend to have the boy—" "My son," Marcus corrected her, "is exactly where he belongs, because what I have to say affects his future as much as anyone's." He guided Tommy to a chair, then faced the board. 8 weeks ago, I nearly died on a train platform. Not one person in this room came to the hospital that night. Not one person in this room sat by my bed or cared about anything except who would take control of the company. The board members shifted uncomfortably. But a little boy with nothing, a boy who didn't know me, who had every reason to be bitter at the world. He risked his life to save mine. Marcus put his hand on Tommy's shoulder. And in doing so, he saved more than just my life. He saved my heart. Victoria rolled her eyes. "Marcus, please, this emotional display is exactly what this company needs," Marcus cut her off. "Because somewhere along the way, we forgot what matters. We got so focused on profit margins and stock prices that we forgot about people." He pulled out a stack of papers. "So here's what's going to happen. I'm not stepping down. Instead, I'm restructuring the company, starting with a new charitable foundation, the Sarah Wilson Memorial Fund, named after Tommy's mother. We're going to help homeless families, single parents struggling to make ends meet, children who need a chance." The boardroom erupted in protests. "The shareholders will never approve." "Actually," Richard spoke up from the doorway, "they already have. We've been making calls all morning. Turns out a CEO who puts family and social responsibility first is exactly what most of our investors want." Victoria stood up, her face red with anger. "This is ridiculous. You're going to throw away everything we built because of some street urchin?" "No, Victoria," Marcus said calmly. "I'm building something better because my son showed me what really matters. And as for what we built," he smiled coldly, "check your contract. Your position as vice president was always contingent on board approval, which you no longer have." Victoria's mouth fell open. "You can't fire me. Consider it a lesson in what really matters." Marcus turned to Tommy. "Ready to go home, son?" Tommy stood up, feeling taller somehow. "Ready, Dad." As they walked out, board members still shouting behind them, Tommy asked, "Did you really start a foundation named after Mom?" "I did." Marcus squeezed his shoulder. "Because without her raising such an amazing son, I wouldn't be here. And I want her legacy to live on by helping other families who are struggling like you and she did." In the elevator, Tommy hugged Marcus tight. "I was scared you'd lose everything because of me." "Tommy," Marcus said softly, "because of you, I finally have everything that matters." But their victory at the board meeting didn't solve all their problems. When they got home, Richard was waiting with news about the custody case. "James Wilson is demanding a hearing," he said, "next week. He's going to testify about how he's changed, how he wants to make things right." Tommy's happiness faded. I have to see him?" "No," Marcus said firmly, "but you might have to talk to a judge. Tell them what you want." Tommy touched his train pendant, thinking, "Like at the board meeting, just tell the truth?" "Exactly like that." Marcus smiled proudly. "Just be your brave, honest self." That night, Tommy had trouble sleeping. He went to his window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, James Wilson was probably planning what to say to the judge. Somewhere out there, Victoria was probably plotting her revenge. But here, in this home he shared with Marcus, Tommy felt safe. Because he knew now that real strength wasn't in money or power, or even legal rights. Real strength was in love, the kind that made you jump onto train tracks, the kind that made you fight for what mattered, the kind that built families out of choices instead of blood. Tommy touched the photo by his bed, the one of his mom smiling despite all their struggles. "I chose well, Mom," he whispered. "I chose someone who loves me like you did." And somehow he knew she was smiling down on both her sons, the one she had given birth to and the one who had chosen to carry on her legacy of love. The morning of the custody hearing arrived with a mix of sun and clouds, much like Tommy's emotions. He stood in front of his mirror wearing a new suit Marcus had bought him, navy blue like his first one, but with subtle pinstripes that made him look older somehow. "Remember," Marcus said, helping him with his tie, "you don't have to say anything you don't want to. Just tell the truth." Tommy nodded, his throat too tight to speak. The past week had been a blur of preparation. Richard had helped him practice what to say, how to address the judge, what questions to expect. But nothing could really prepare him for facing James Wilson again. The courthouse was packed with reporters. Marcus kept Tommy close as they made their way through the crowd. Inside, the courtroom felt huge and scary, all dark wood and serious faces. James Wilson was already there, wearing a new suit that still somehow looked wrong on him. Gloria Chase sat beside him, arranging papers importantly. On their side, Richard looked calm and prepared, but Tommy could see Marcus's hands shaking slightly as he adjusted his cufflinks, a nervous habit Tommy had noticed. "All rise," the bailiff called out. "The Honorable Judge Eleanor Martinez presiding." The judge was an older woman with kind eyes but a stern expression. She looked over her glasses at everyone in the room. "Let me make something clear," she began. "This is not about media attention. This is not about money. This is about what's best for a child. And in my courtroom, that's the only thing that matters." Gloria Chase went first, presenting James Wilson's case. She talked about redemption, about second chances, about the sacred bond between father and son. Wilson took the stand, telling a story about how he'd changed, how seeing Tommy on the news had awakened something in him. "I know I made mistakes," he said, his voice breaking perfectly, "but he's my blood, my son. I just want a chance to make things right." Tommy felt sick listening to him. Everything sounded rehearsed, like a TV show. He squeezed Marcus's hand under the table. Richard's cross-examination was careful but devastating. He brought out Wilson's gambling records, his other abandoned children, his complete lack of effort to find Tommy before the media coverage. "And where were you?" Richard asked. "When Tommy's mother was dying of cancer." Wilson shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't know, because you never looked, never called, never sent a single dollar of support." Richard's voice was quiet but firm. "You claim blood matters, but where was that blood when your son was sleeping in train stations?" When it was Marcus's turn to testify, he didn't talk about his money or his company. He talked about mourning, pancakes and homework help, about nightmares and hugs, about a little boy who had saved him in every way possible. "Tommy chose me," he said simply. "He chooses me every day, just like I choose him. That's what real family is about." Finally, it was Tommy's turn. His legs felt like jelly as he walked to the witness stand. The judge smiled encouragingly at him. "Tommy," she said gently, "I know this is scary, but I need you to tell me what you want. Not what anyone else wants. What you want." Tommy took a deep breath and touched his train pendant. He looked at James Wilson, who was trying to smile at him, then at Marcus, who just nodded supportively. "When I was little," Tommy began, "after my dad left, my mum used to tell me that some people are like trains. They pass through your life and keep going. But some people are like stations. They're there to give you shelter, to be your home." He turned to the judge. "James Wilson is a train. He passed through our lives and kept going. He only came back because he saw me on TV. Because Marcus, here's Rich. That's not love, that's not being a father." Tommy's voice got stronger. "Marcus is my station, he's my home. Not because he's rich or famous, but because he loves me. He chose me when I had nothing. He fights for me every day. He's teaching me that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do what's right anyway." Tears were rolling down his cheeks now, but he kept going. "My mom used to say that family is about love, not blood. She was right. Marcus is my real father because he acts like one. He's there for the nightmares and the homework and the hard days. He's there every morning and every night. He's just there." The courtroom was completely silent. Even Gloria Chase had stopped writing notes. "James Wilson says he wants another chance," Tommy continued. "But he had 8 years of chances. 8 years when I needed a father. Where was he then? Marcus has been my father for 8 weeks, and he's given me more love than James Wilson did in 8 years." He looked directly at Wilson now. You can't. Just show up when it's easy and claim to be a father. Being a father means being there when it's hard. Like Marcus is. Like he always will be. Tommy's voice cracked. Please don't take me away from my real dad. Please don't break up my real family. The judge was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked at James Wilson. Mr. Wilson, do you have anything to add? Wilson stood up, but for once, he seemed to have no rehearsed speech ready. The truth in Tommy's words had stripped away all his pretenses. He started, then stopped. He looked at Tommy, really looked at him, maybe for the first time. You're right, he said finally. I haven't been a father. I just thought, when I saw you on TV, you thought it would be easy now, Tommy finished for him. But being a family isn't about easy, it's about love. Wilson sat down heavily. After a moment, he whispered something to Gloria Chase. She looked surprised, then stood up. Your Honor, she said, my client wishes to withdraw his petition for custody and... She glanced at Wilson, who nodded. He's prepared to sign papers terminating his parental rights to clear the way for Mr. Langford's adoption. A murmur went through the courtroom. The judge looked at Wilson. Are you sure about this, Mr. Wilson? Wilson nodded, not meeting anyone's eyes. The boy's right. He deserves better than what I can give him. He deserves the father he chose. Tommy felt Marcus's arms around him, heard people talking and papers shuffling, but it all seemed far away. The only thing that felt real was the sound of his own heart beating, finally free of the fear that had gripped it since the night of the gala. As they left the courthouse, reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, but Tommy didn't care. He was going home with his real father, the father who had chosen him and whom he had chosen in return. In the car, Marcus hugged him tight. I'm so proud of you, he whispered. So incredibly proud. Tommy hugged him back. Can we go home now? I'm tired of being brave. Marcus laughed. Softly. You never have to be brave alone again, son, never again. As their car pulled away from the courthouse, Tommy saw James Wilson standing on the steps watching them go. But this time, Tommy didn't feel scared or angry. He just felt sorry for the man who had never understood that being a father was about more than blood. It was about love, about choice, about being someone's home station in the storm, and Tommy had finally found his. 3 months after the custody hearing, Grand Central Station was transformed. The same platform where Tommy had once saved Marcus's life was now decorated with flowers and twinkling lights. A small group of people gathered there, watching as Tommy, wearing a new suit, stood beside Marcus in front of a judge. This is unusual, the judge said with a smile. Most adoptions happen in courtrooms, but I understand why this place is special to you both. Marcus looked around at the platform, at the tracks that had changed both their lives. This is where our family began. It felt right to make it official here. The ceremony was simple, but beautiful. Richard stood as a witness, beaming with pride. Sarah, Tommy's tutor who had become like family, wiped tears from her eyes. Even some of the station workers who remembered that fateful night came to watch. Marcus Langford, the judge asked, do you commit to being Tommy's father, to loving and protecting him, to putting his needs first for all the days of your life? Marcus's voice was thick with emotion. I do. I have since the moment he saved me. And Tommy, the judge turned to him, do you choose Marcus to be your father, to trust in his love and guidance, to be his son in all ways that matter? Tommy squeezed Marcus's hand. I do. I choose him today and every day. The judge smiled. Then by the power vested in me by the state of New York, I hereby declare your adoption complete. You are now, legally and forever, father and son. The small crowd burst into applause. Marcus hugged Tommy tight, both of them crying happy tears. I love you, Dad, Tommy whispered. I love you too, son, Marcus replied, forever. As they signed the final papers, Tommy noticed something moving in the shadows near the station exit. It was Victoria, watching from a distance. But she wasn't. Wearing her usual perfect makeup and designer clothes, she looked tired, defeated. Tommy tugged on Marcus's sleeve and pointed. Marcus saw her too, but instead of anger, His face showed something like pity. "Should we invite her to the celebration?" Tommy asked, surprising himself. Marcus looked down at his son proudly. "That's very generous of you, Tommy. But I think Victoria needs to find her own path now. Sometimes the biggest gift we can give someone is letting them go." Victoria must have seen them looking because she turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of regular commuters. Tommy felt a little sad for her, but he understood what Marcus meant. Some people were like trains. They had to keep moving until they found their own station. The celebration moved to a private room in the station's famous oyster bar restaurant. The tables were decorated with tiny model trains, and the cake had a perfect sugar sculpture of the station on top. Richard raised his glass in a toast. "To second chances," he said, "and to the bravest 8-year-old I've ever met." Tommy blushed as everyone clinked their glasses. Then he had his own surprise. He pulled a small wrapped package from under his chair and handed it to Marcus. "What's this?" Marcus asked. "Open it," Tommy urged. Inside was a framed photograph, but not just any photograph. It was the worn picture of Tommy's mom, the one he'd carried with him through all his hard times. Next to it was a new picture of Tommy and Marcus from the train museum, both of them smiling. Between the two photos was Tommy's blue marble from his mom, sealed forever in the frame. "So my whole family is together," Tommy explained softly. Marcus had to wipe his eyes before he could speak. "It's perfect," he managed finally, "just like our family." After the celebration, they walked through the station together. The evening commuters rushed past, most of them too busy to notice the well-dressed man and boy walking hand in hand. But a few of the regular station workers called out congratulations. They stopped at the exact spot where Tommy had pulled Marcus from the tracks. "Were you scared?" Tommy asked suddenly. "That night, I mean." Marcus thought about it. Terrified, but not of dying exactly. "I was scared because I realized I had everything the world said should make me happy. Money, success, power. But I was alone. Really alone." He squeezed Tommy's hand. "But then this amazing boy jumped onto the tracks and saved more than just my life. He saved my heart, gave me a reason to live that was bigger than business deals and bank accounts." Tommy leaned against him. "I was scared too. Not of jumping on the tracks. That just happened, like my body knew what to do before my brain did. I was scared after when I asked you to be my dad for a day, scared you'd say no." "Best yes I ever said," Marcus smiled. Though one day was never going to be enough. They walked to their car, passing the spot where Tommy used to hide and watch the crowds. It felt like a lifetime ago, but it had only been a few months. "Dad?" Tommy asked as they drove home. "Do you think Mom would be happy about today?" Marcus touched the framed photos Tommy had given him. "I think she'd be overjoyed, because she loved you enough to want you to be happy, to be safe, to be loved. And you are." That night after they got home, Tommy stood at his bedroom window looking out at the city, but he wasn't the same scared little boy who used to watch the world from hiding places. Now he had a home, a father, a future. He touched his train pendant, thinking about all the changes that had brought him here, about a mother who had loved him through poverty and pain, about a man who had opened his heart to a homeless boy, about a night on a train platform that had changed everything. Marcus appeared in his doorway. "Ready for bed, son?" Tommy smiled at the word. "Son." It felt right, like it had always been waiting to be said between them. "Dad?" he asked as Marcus tucked him in. "Are we always going to be okay now?" Marcus sat on the edge of the bed. "Life will still have hard parts, Tommy, but we'll face them together. That's what families do, real families, chosen families. Like trains and stations." Tommy yawned. "Exactly like that." Marcus kissed his forehead. "We're each other's home station. Always." As Tommy drifted off to sleep, he could hear the distant sound of trains running through the city. But he wasn't lonely anymore, wasn't scared, because he had found something better than all the riches in the world. He had found his father, his home, his forever station in the storm. And somewhere, watching over them both, a mother smiled at the family her son had chosen, the family that had chosen him right back. In the end, that's what love is, Not blood or birth or duty, just choice. The choice to save someone on a train platform. The choice to open your heart to a child. The choice to build a family from nothing but love and trust and the courage to begin again. Tommy and Marcus had made that choice, and they would keep making it every day for all the days to come together.